My name is Dr. Lauren Whitmore. I'm the chief of surgery at Providence Lutheran Hospital in Seattle. I trained at Stanford. I finished top of my class. I've performed over 200 neurosurgeries, many of them what most people would call impossible. But to my family, I'm the one who couldn't keep a boyfriend, chose work over marriage, and never showed up for her sister. At least that's what my mother said last Christmas. I hadn't been invited. But I heard the recording. My sister's husband thought it'd be funny to play back the dinner conversation for a few friends at his office. Unfortunately for him, someone there happened to be a former classmate of mine, someone who actually respected what I do. So when I say my family told everyone I failed, I mean it. It wasn't just a careless remark over wine. It was a curated narrative, the kind you repeat so often it calcifies into truth. And yet months later, I found myself sitting silently beside my sister's hospital bed, watching her chest rise slowly tethered to a maze of monitors and IV lines, while my parents stood on the other side, talking as if I weren't even there. Then the nurse walked in. She glanced at me, blinked twice, and softly bowed her head. "Hello, Chief of Surgery." That's when Camille's eyes darted toward me. Her mouth parted, but no sound came. My father turned pale. My mother's hand froze midair. I said nothing. I didn't need to. But I wasn't always this calm. I wasn't always this composed. Let me tell you what led to that moment. Let me tell you what it feels like to be erased by your own blood and then to walk back into their lives with nothing but steady hands and a sealed silence. Not as revenge, but as proof. Cedarview, Oregon. That's where I grew up. A postcard town if you don't look too closely. My father, Henry Whitmore, is a retired attorney. My mother, Diane, a part-time event planner and full-time image curator. And my sister, Camille, dear Camille, was the town's golden girl, cheer captain, homecoming queen. First to get engaged, first to get pregnant, first to be forgiven for everything. I was none of those things. I was the one with books instead of boyfriends, with silence instead of charm. I loved human anatomy before I learned to love myself. I memorized brain structures when Camille was learning dance routines. And no matter what I did, it was never the kind of accomplishment that could be wrapped in a bow and shown off at brunch. When I got accepted into Stanford Medical School, my mother said, "That's impressive. But will it make you happy, Lauren?" Translation. It doesn't make her happy. I didn't argue. I never did. I packed my things and left for California with a duffel bag and a spine, already learning to carry disappointment. Camille stayed. She married Julian Adler. They bought a house 4 blocks from our parents, hosted neighborhood barbecues with labeled cheese boards and backyard games. I visited twice in 6 years. On the second visit, Julian asked if I was still playing doctor. I told him I was performing vascular reconstructions. He laughed. I didn't. Then came the call. It was a Thursday. Rain on the windows. I was finishing post-op notes when my pager buzzed. Stat transfer. 33-year-old female. Suspected aneurysmal rupture. Status unstable. Requesting neurosurgical evaluation. I flipped to the patient's chart and froze. Name Camille Adler. For a moment, I stared at the page, refusing to feel. My hands moved before my brain did. I notified the trauma team. I scrubbed in. I issued orders with the same clarity I always had. No one in that room knew I shared DNA with the woman bleeding into her own skull. And I wanted it that way. Because that night, in that moment, I wasn't her sister. I was her only chance. Cedarview looks like one of those towns you'd see in a travel magazine. Quaint Main Street, white picket fences, kids on bikes with baseball cards in their spokes. But for me, Cedarview was a polished lie. A place where everything looked pleasant if you didn't ask too many questions or look too hard. My parents, Henry and Diane Whitmore, were Cedarview royalty. Not because they had titles, but because they knew how to perform. My father was a retired attorney, always in pressed khakis and navy sweaters, known for his measured wisdom and quiet disdain. My mother ran a boutique event planning business and lived for reputation management. She could smile while severing you from her approval like a limb she no longer needed. They didn't yell, they didn't curse, they edited. They edited me out of dinner conversations, out of family photos, out of introductions at church. Camille, on the other hand, was never edited. She was curated. She was the sunbeam. Blonde hair, soft laugh, the kind of girl who wrote thank you notes in cursive and never got parking tickets. When I was 15, a neighbor once told me you're Camille's sister. I didn't realize. As if I were the footnote in someone else's headline. I wore glasses that always slipped down my nose. I kept my hair in a low bun to stay out of the way when I studied. I preferred the library to the football stands. I dissected frogs with a scalpel while Camille painted her nails before school dances. We shared a roof, not a world. At Cedarview High, she was voted most beloved. I was voted most likely to burn out. I didn't go to prom. I went to a science symposium in Portland instead. When I won the state biology fair, my mother told her friends I had won something academic, but didn't remember the name of the award. When Camille got third place in a county cheerleading competition, my mom laminated the ribbon and hung it in the hallway. Everything in our house was about presentation. Our family Christmas card looked like an advertisement for generational wealth. Camille's highlights were perfect. My existence was blurred out in the background. Even our home carried the performance. White colonial, blue shutters, a brass plaque by the mailbox that read, Whitmore, grace above all. That was our motto, grace above all. It wasn't just a saying. It was a rule. Don't make scenes. Don't cry in public. Don't air your pain. Grace wasn't about kindness. It was about decorum. About silence. About making people uncomfortable without ever raising your voice. I think I learned early on that in Cedarview, it wasn't what you did that mattered. It was how you looked doing it. Camille once got caught shoplifting lip gloss at the age of 14. My mother told the store clerk it must have been a misunderstanding. I once corrected a Sunday school teacher who gave a scientifically inaccurate answer about the human brain, and my father called me disrespectful on the car ride home. I learned to keep my brilliance hidden to dull myself in family gatherings. I smiled when I wasn't happy. I apologized when I was right. I shrank so others could feel bigger. I never hated Camille for it. She didn't make the rules. She just fit them better. She knew how to say things that got praise. I knew how to say things that got silence. And over time, that silence became my companion, my shield, my prison. When I left for Stanford, there was no going away party. My parents didn't help me move. Camille had a stomach flu that week, and everything revolved around whether she'd be well enough to cheer at Friday's home game. I drove myself down the coast in a rusted Volvo with 2 boxes and a list of scholarships. As I passed the town's welcome sign one last time, I glanced back in the rearview mirror and whispered grace above all. But what I really meant was never again. Never again would I pretend that being overlooked was noble. Never again would I mistake quiet for peace. Never again would I be the girl with answers no one wanted to hear. Cedarview taught me how to disappear politely, but medicine surgery specifically taught me how to cut away what doesn't serve. And one day when my family looked me in the eye and realized the person they erased had saved their favorite child's life, I wouldn't say a word. I would let the silence speak for me. The envelope was thick, the kind that feels like it's holding the future. I didn't open it right away. I held it in my lap as I sat in my car outside the Whitmore house, staring at the brass plaque by the mailbox. Grace above all. It had snowed the night before. The driveway sparkled with frost. From the living room window, I could see Camille laughing with our mother holding up a pair of silver heels. It was wedding season, and Camille had 3 bridal showers to attend that month. None of them were hers. I stepped inside quietly. My boots made no sound on the hardwood. I remember thinking that even the air inside our house was filtered staged, curated like a magazine layout. Mom glanced up from the couch. "You're home early." I held up the envelope. It came. She squinted. From Stanford, I nodded. She reached for it, opened it quickly, skimmed the first paragraph. Her expression didn't change. No pride, no shock, no joy. "That's impressive," she said. "But will it make you happy, Lauren?" I blinked. "It's the top medical program on the West Coast." She set the letter down on the coffee table, as if it were a grocery coupon, then turned to Camille. "Don't forget to book your hair appointment, honey. Madison's wedding is next weekend." Camille nodded, still clutching her shoes. She looked at me briefly, just long enough to register the pause, but said nothing. I picked the letter up quietly and went upstairs. My room smelled like old textbooks and restraint. I placed the envelope in the top drawer of my desk, beneath a copy of Gray's Anatomy and an unopened graduation card from my Aunt Margie that simply said, "Keep shining." That night over dinner, my father asked Camille how her spin class was. Then he launched into a story about a client's dog surgery that cost $12,000. He laughed at the absurdity of it. No one asked me what I planned to specialize in. No one said congratulations. I pushed peas around my plate and waited for someone to look at me, really look. But I had already learned by then that invisibility wasn't an accident, it was a design choice. After dinner, I washed the dishes, alone, as usual. As I dried the last plate, Camille came into the kitchen. She leaned against the counter and studied me. "So, you're really going?" I nodded. "In September." She chewed her lip. "That's far, it's where the best go." She gave a half smile. "Well, maybe that's what you need." I wasn't sure what she meant, but I remember that moment, not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't. She didn't say, "I'm proud of you." She didn't say, "You deserve this." Instead, she said, "Don't forget to visit." And I nodded, even though I knew I wouldn't. I left Cedarview 3 months later. No party, no farewell dinner, no family photo at the car. My dad gave me a firm handshake at the door. My mom told me to be careful. Camille waved from the porch while texting someone else. The drive to California took 13 hours. I made it in 12. I didn't stop for gas until I saw the Stanford sign. When I pulled into the dorm lot, I sat in my car for a long while. Not because I was afraid, but because it was the first time in my life that I wasn't performing for someone else. I was no one's daughter, no one's shadow, no one's mistake to fix. Just a girl with a stethoscope in her duffel bag and a heartbeat that finally belonged to her. Later that night, I unpacked the Stanford letter and taped it to the wall above my desk. Not as a trophy, but as a witness. A silent reminder that even if no one clapped for me, I had still arrived. And I would keep arriving again and again in rooms where my name was spoken with respect, even if my family never said it. Camille married Julian Adler on a Sunday in late spring. The ceremony was held at the Cedarview Country Club, complete with white roses, a harpist flown in from Portland, and an outdoor reception under string lights and gold-draped canopies. I wasn't there. I wasn't invited. I found out through an Instagram story, not even hers, someone else's. A former classmate who posted a boomerang of the cake cutting. Camille looked beautiful, of course. She always did. Her dress was sleeveless ivory laced with delicate embroidery. Her hair swept back soft curls cascading down one shoulder, and Julian stood next to her looking like the cover of a magazine, polished proud, and completely unaware that I existed. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, but I did sit on the floor of my apartment in my surgical scrubs, watching that 30-second loop over and over. Not because I wished I'd been there, but because the absence had become so sharp, so deliberate, it left no room for confusion. They hadn't simply forgotten to invite me. I had been removed. 2 weeks later, a friend from med school, Emily, sent me a picture. "I thought you might want to see this," she wrote. Attached was a photo from the reception, taken before guests arrived. A wide shot of the head table, white linens, gold chargers, personalized name cards in elegant calligraphy. Camille, Julian, Diane, Henry, Ethan, her college roommate, even Mrs. Levitt, our former neighbor. And then far left, a chair with no one beside it. A folded card turned face down on the plate. Emily had zoomed in. In pencil faintly erased, you could still make out what had once been written, Lauren. It was as if someone had written me in and then changed their mind. The chair remained, but the name had been erased. I stared at that image for a long time, longer than I cared to admit. Not because I wished I'd been seated there, but because it confirmed something I had long suspected I had once been counted, however briefly, before being deemed expendable. Julian had always smiled too easily, too widely. He was the kind of man who used words like sweetheart to refer to waitresses, and once said women in surgery had something to prove. I remember one summer barbecue where he turned to me and asked, still playing Dr. Lauren. I told him I'd just led a triple aneurysm repair. He chuckled like it was a joke, like I was pretending. At the wedding, he toasted Camille's loyalty, her family values, her heart, and maybe in some twisted way leaving me off the guest list was a tribute to all three. Later that night, I pinned the photo to the inside of my closet, not out of bitterness, but as a quiet kind of vow, to never again wait for a seat at a table where I wasn't welcome, to never again shrink myself to make someone else more comfortable, to never again measure my worth by how others choose to remember me or forget me. In the weeks that followed, I buried myself in work. 12-hour shifts became 15. I requested high-risk cases, volunteered for overnight coverage. I told myself it was for the patients, but deep down, I knew better. Every life I saved felt like a rebuttal. Every suture, a sentence they'd never get to speak. Every steady hand, a reminder that while they hosted champagne toasts and pretended I didn't exist, I was out in the world doing something that mattered. And one day, when everything turned upside down, when Camille's life hung in the balance, and no amount of table decor or curated family image could save her, they would remember the name they once tried to erase. They would remember mine. It was a Thursday. My shift was almost over. Rain tapped gently against the high windows of the trauma wing. I was reviewing post-op notes from a difficult pediatric case when my pager buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it casually, at first expecting another routine consult or a delay in pathology. But my eyes caught the name, and something inside me stopped moving. Camille Whitmore. Critical condition. Suspected ruptured cerebral aneurysm. Incoming via ambulance. ETA 14 minutes. Emergency contact Dr. Lauren Whitmore. I froze. The sterile hum of the room seemed to vanish. My fingers, trained for precision, curled slightly around the edge of the counter. I read the screen twice, then a third time, just to be sure it wasn't some sick coincidence. But no, her date of birth was there, her address, her emergency file complete with a contact number. Mine. I hadn't heard from Camille in over 8 months. The last communication had been a forwarded email from our mother about a church fundraiser. I hadn't responded. I thought we'd reached a silent agreement to stay out of each other's lives. But apparently somewhere in the background she had never removed me from that box, labeled in case of emergency. I didn't have time to think about what that meant. I picked up the phone and called the trauma desk. The nurse who answered sounded calm, but clipped. We have a 33-year-old female en route, found unconscious at a restaurant downtown, vomiting, disoriented prior to collapse. Paramedics reported brief seizure activity, blood pressure unstable, pupils unequal. Glasgow Coma Scale, 7. We're preparing the CT suite now. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to remain level. I'll scrub in. There was a pause. You're taking the case, Dr. Whitmore? Yes, I said. Prep or 3. Notify neurosurgical support and anesthesia. I want labs drawn, stat, and a full neuro workup the moment she arrives. Yes, doctor, right away. I hung up. My heart was racing, but my hands were already moving. I pulled my hair back, removed my coat, and changed into scrubs. My badge clipped cleanly onto my collar. I didn't look at myself in the mirror. I didn't need to. In the elevator down to the surgical floor, I stood alone. The air was cold. My fingers traced the edge of the surgical gloves in my pocket. I could feel the buzz of my own pulse under the skin. There was a moment, just one, when the doors opened, and I considered stepping back, handing the case to someone else, claiming a conflict of interest. But then I saw the trauma bay through the glass, staff assembling monitors, flashing, controlled chaos building, and I knew there was no choice. Because if Camille died under someone else's hands, I would never forgive myself. And if she lived because of mine, well, that was something I'd learn how to carry. I reached the OR just as the gurney wheeled in. She looked small. Her face was pale, almost colorless. A thin trickle of blood traced the edge of her ear where the paramedics had secured the IV. Her lips were parted slightly. A monitor beeped beside her, erratic. Her left hand dangled off the stretcher. She was still wearing her wedding ring. Someone called out vitals. Someone else handed me the scan. The bleed was real. Anterior communicating artery. Large, expanding. Immediate risk to brainstem function. I nodded once. Let's begin. And just like that, I stopped being her sister. I became her surgeon. Elise met me outside the scrub room. She had already reviewed the scans and was halfway through assembling the neurosurgical team. Her brow furrowed when she saw me in scrubs. You're not assisting, are you? I pulled on my gloves without looking up. I'm taking the lead. She stepped closer. Lauren, that's a direct violation of protocol. You're listed as her emergency contact. That's a familial conflict if I turned to face her. If it were your sister on that table, would you stand outside and hope someone else could do it better than you? Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. She looked down, then nodded once. I'll manage the outside support, she said quietly. That was all I needed. Inside the OR, the air was clinical and crisp. The room had been prepped flawlessly. The anesthesiologist was reviewing vitals. The scrub techs were already laying out the instruments in perfect symmetry. Everything was just as it should be, except it wasn't. Because no one in that room knew that the blood pooling inside the patient's skull belonged to someone I had once shared a bunk bed with. No one knew that just 2 years earlier, that same patient had hosted a Thanksgiving dinner where my name wasn't even mentioned. No one knew that I had once taken the blame for breaking our mother's vase so Camille wouldn't lose her birthday party. And none of it mattered now. I reviewed the chart: female 34, subarachnoid hemorrhage, pupils unequal, GCS score dropping. It read like any other trauma profile. But it wasn't. This wasn't just a brain I had to operate on. It was a lifetime of unspoken things I had to keep buried, while cutting open the skull of the girl who used to braid my hair before dance recitals I never got to perform in. "Scalpel," I said. The room moved in synchronized motion. I could hear my heart beat louder than the monitors. As I made the first incision, my mind went still. It always did. That was the gift surgery had given me, a kind of sacred silence. No voices, no memories, just precision. The dura was tight. The pressure from the bleed had pushed it taut. One miscalculation, and she'd never open her eyes again. "Clip ready," I said. The resident on my left passed it over. His hands trembled slightly. Mine didn't. I navigated through the tangled vessels with the kind of muscle memory only time and trauma can teach. Every millimeter felt like a lifetime. Every shift of my wrist was a contract I was writing with fate, Camille's fate. Behind my mask, I whispered not to her, not to the team, but to myself. "You don't get to break on me now." I found the ruptured artery, a brutal tear along the anterior communicating segment. I placed the clip. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. Monitors stabilized. I exhaled once, soft, quiet, close up. The team moved in. Sutures, cleanup, standard procedure, but nothing about that hour had been standard. I stepped back from the table, stripped off my gloves, and tossed them into the bin. My hands, once steady, now tingled with delayed adrenaline. I walked to the corner sink, stared at my reflection in the steel panel above the faucet. For a moment, I saw her. Not Camille. Me, but not the doctor. Not the disappointment. Not the girl they forgot to invite. Just me. And I didn't look away. The whine of the cranial drill is a sound I've grown used to. It's high-pitched, steady, focused, like a violin string pulled tight. Most surgeons say they tune it out. I never could. I listen to it. I follow it like a trail, one that leads me through bone and time. Camille's skull was thinner than expected. The pressure had pushed outward, reshaping the contours. The bleeding was deep but localized. I adjusted the angle slightly. A few more millimeters, and I would reach the subarachnoid space. And that's when it came back to me. We were in the backyard. I was 13. Camille had been 8, wearing her favorite pink dress with the ribbons on the shoulders. She was trying to jump from the porch swing to the ground, arms wide like a cartoon superhero. I told her not to. She did it anyway. The snap of bone was louder than I thought it would be. Her wrist bent the wrong way. She screamed this raw animal sound that made my own spine lock. I ran to her, dropped to my knees, and did what I'd read about in one of my anatomy kits. I gently held her forearm, checked for circulation, tried to comfort her. "It's a distal radius fracture," I said. "We can splint it until we get to the hospital." I was just a kid. But I knew what I was talking about. My mother came running, still in heels, from brunch. "What happened?" she shouted. I explained everything calmly, logically. She didn't even look at me. She scooped Camille into her arms, brushing past me like I wasn't even there. Inside, as she wrapped Camille's arm in a dish towel, she muttered under her breath, "You always think you know everything, Lauren. Always diagnosing like the world needs saving." I stood by the sink, my hands clenched into fists. "You're not a doctor," she said sharply. "You're a child with delusions. Do you want people to think you're some kind of know-it-all freak?" I remember looking at Camille, who had stopped crying by then, eyes swollen but watching me. And I remember walking out of the kitchen. That night I didn't eat dinner. I reread my anatomy book under the covers, flashlight in hand, and told myself I would never speak up again unless I had the degree to back it. Back in the operating room, I adjusted my grip. The clip was ready. I reached into Camille's brain, past the membrane that protected her memories, her thoughts, her essence. I found the rupture angry, dark, still threatening. One movement, one clip. And it would all change. I paused just for a breath, not because I doubted, but because I knew that somewhere inside this broken body was the girl in the pink dress, the girl who jumped too far, who cried out for help. And I was still the only one who had heard her clearly. "Clip secured," I said. The bleeding stopped. The team murmured quiet approvals. Sutures were prepped. The attending noted the time. I let them finish without me. I stepped away, peeled off my gloves, and stood by the window where the early morning light was beginning to filter in. I thought about how many times I had been told to be quiet, to wait, to soften my voice. But in that moment, scalpel in hand, memory in mind, I realized something. They had always told me to stay in my place. And now, that place was here, at the head of the table, saving the very person they told me I wasn't good enough to sit beside. As Camille was wheeled out of the OR and into post-op, I removed my gloves and gown in silence. The adrenaline was still thick in my blood, but I kept my posture steady. There was no room for unraveling. Not yet. In the hallway outside recovery, I spotted one of the newer nurses, a young woman named Natalie, reviewing the surgical log. She glanced up at me, clearly about to speak. "Don't put my name on the board," I said softly. She blinked. "But you led the procedure." "I know," I replied. "List it under trauma attending. Leave it anonymous." She hesitated. "Dr. Whitmore. Family's going to ask who performed the surgery. They always do." "I'm aware," I said. "Just don't answer. Tell them the team handled it. That's not a lie." She looked at me carefully, sensing something bigger than protocol. But to her credit, she didn't press. She just nodded. Understood. It wasn't about hiding credit. I didn't care about that. It wasn't even about fear, though. If I'm honest, there was a part of me that dreaded how my parents would react. I could already imagine it, my mother's lips tightening, my father's unreadable nod, Julian trying not to flinch. But none of that mattered. I kept the truth quiet because it was the only way to do this right. The only way to protect the sanctity of what had just happened. Because for that hour inside the OR, I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't her sister. I was a surgeon. Nothing more, and certainly nothing less. When family and medicine mix, the lines blur. Expectations grow wild and distorted. Either you're worshipped or dismissed, never seen clearly. I didn't want that. Not this time. This wasn't about redemption. It wasn't about winning back a seat at their table. It was about preserving what I'd spent years building: my skill, my integrity, my name. So I asked for silence. I returned to my office an hour later, still in Scrub's hair, pulled tight, palms faintly trembling. I sat down, opened Camille's chart, and entered my post-op notes with clinical detachment. No mention of our history, no mention of our blood, just her vitals, her response to anesthesia. The clip placement, estimated blood loss, closing time, projected recovery trajectory, facts, nothing else. I had spent my whole life carrying feelings that didn't fit inside rooms like this. But the OR didn't care about feelings. It cared about precision. It was the only place I'd ever felt safe enough to be exactly who I was. And that included knowing when to disappear. Later that morning, Elise found me by the vending machines. She handed me a cup of terrible coffee and leaned against the wall. "She made it," she said. I nodded. "You don't want credit, do you?" "No," I answered. "Because they're going to ask. When she wakes up, when they see her, I'll deal with it then." Elise tilted her head. "You know, if you were anyone else, this would be unethical." "I know, but you're not. And if it had been me in that bed, I'd want you operating." That was all she said. And it was all I needed to hear. That afternoon, I stopped by the ICU observation window. Camille was stable, heavily sedated but breathing on her own. Her hair had been partially shaved for the procedure. Her skin was pale, the kind of pale that reminds you how thin the veil between life and death really is. I watched her chest rise and fall. Watched the machines track her rhythms. There was a quiet hum around her, like the room itself was holding its breath. I didn't go in. I didn't touch her hand. I didn't speak. Because if I crossed that threshold, I wouldn't be a doctor anymore. I'd be a sister. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure what that meant. The OR was quiet in the way only experienced trauma teams know how to keep it focused, alert, coiled. Outside the walls of that room, panic may have been rising. Inside, it was only movement and breath. And the beeping. That steady, relentless beeping from the vitals monitor faster than it should have been erratic at times, like a warning trying not to become a scream. Camille's blood pressure dropped again. BP is 90/50. Oxygen saturation at 82. The anesthesiologist called out calm, but tense. She's losing perfusion, Elise muttered, eyes on the second monitor. I already knew. I could see it on the brain scan. The bleed had spread. The initial tear was worse than we thought, slightly posterior to the anterior communicating artery. A fraction more swelling, and the pressure would shut down her brainstem. I had seconds, maybe less. Clamp ready, I said. Elise handed it to me with both hands. I felt the weight of it immediately. The standard clip was too large. If I placed it as is, I'd risk compressing the surrounding arteries, cutting off circulation, causing permanent ischemia. But if I hesitated, if I chose another tool, she might not survive the delay. The decision was mine alone. Give me the 2.5 microclip, I said. Elise looked at me. That's under protocol minimum. I know, I answered. Give it to me. She didn't argue. A tray clinked softly, metal on metal. I took the smaller clip into my hand, barely the width of a pinky nail. I guided it down into the cavity, my hands working with surgical instinct, not hesitation. The vessel was thinner than I wanted it to be, more fragile. The walls pulsed erratically. One wrong move, one twitch, and everything would end. I tuned out the noise, the machines, the room. My own fear. It was just me and the artery. I made the placement, pressure, stillness. Then the beeping on the monitor began to settle. Slowly, steadily, like a tide pulling back. Elise confirmed occlusion. She peered into the scope. No more active bleeding. Flow is preserved. I exhaled through my nose, the only release I allowed myself. Start closing. The team moved fast, but careful. I stayed by the field until every suture was placed, every margin checked, every line cleared. By the time we finished, the lights above us felt warmer, less clinical. When I finally pulled my gloves off and stepped away from the table, my arms ached. My fingertips tingled. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been gripping my own focus. Elise walked over and placed a hand gently on my shoulder. You're a miracle, she said. I didn't answer, not because I disagreed, but because I didn't feel like one. Not yet. Because miracles don't ache. And mine did. The morning after the surgery, I arrived at the ICU precisely at 7. My coat was pressed, my blouse crisp, my ID badge clipped exactly where it belonged. The surgical notes were in my hand, the chart already reviewed twice before I even stepped off the elevator. I looked like every other attending on rounds. That was the point. From the outside, no one would have guessed that I hadn't slept. That the patient in room 514 was my sister. That I had stood over her skull with a microclip barely larger than a paper staple and made a call that could have gone either way. My hair was tied back. My steps measured my face still. I was ready to be invisible again. Through the observation window, I saw Camille in the bed. Sedated. Still ventilated but stable. Her vitals were holding. The swelling had gone down slightly. The color had returned to her face. I didn't enter. Instead, I stood just outside reviewing the chart with the kind of detached clarity I'd perfected over a decade in trauma. I circled a dosage adjustment for post-op medication and made a note for a second scan at 2 p.m. Then I heard the elevator doors open behind me. Footsteps, 3 sets. Slow, heavy. My parents had arrived. They walked through the corridor like a silent parade, my mother in a beige wool coat. Hair-styled, lips drawn tight. My father in his usual navy, carrying nothing but his phone and restraint. And beside them, trailing half a step behind, was Julian Adler. I didn't turn. They didn't see me. Not yet. They approached the nurse's station. I could hear my mother's voice, low, urgent, pressed. We need to know who performed the surgery. Please? We want to thank them. The charge nurse glanced toward me but didn't say anything. My mother repeated her question. Her tone wasn't demanding. It was desperate. And I understood that. I did, because for all her efforts to sculpt and curate, she hadn't built anything that could save Camille. No brunch invitation, no Christmas card, no family photo. None of it could help now, and she knew it. Still, I said nothing. Just stood where I was, a few feet from the glass, hidden in plain sight. Another nurse, a younger one probably from night shift, flipped through the chart and offered too much information. She was lucky. Dr. Whitmore took the case herself. It was touch and go for a while, but she's stable now. I heard it land. The name. My name. The air went still. My mother froze. My father turned his head slightly, as if the angle would make the name sound different. Julian didn't react at all, probably still processing. I didn't move. Not yet. Then my mother said, barely above a whisper. Lauren, the charge nurse, looked confused. I finally turned. No smile, no nod, just eye contact. The silence between us lasted longer than I expected. And then I walked away. Clipboard in hand, blazer buttoned, steps even, like nothing had happened. Like I was just another doctor on rounds. The ICU waiting room was too quiet for how tense it felt. I stood near the double glass doors, far enough to be unseen, close enough to hear. Camille had been moved to a step-down unit after her vitals stabilized. She was waking up slowly, groggy, with brief moments of clarity. The morning had been smooth. I kept my rounds professional. I checked charts, updated the neuro team. No one had asked me anything personal, and I didn't offer, just like I'd planned. Then the family arrived. My parents, Julian, even Diane's best friend Marlene, who always wore too much perfume and spoke as if she were paid to narrate other people's milestones. They stood outside Camille's room, speaking in hushed tones. A nurse came by to check Camille's vitals. She looked new, probably covering extra shifts from the float pool. Marlene, nosy as ever, leaned forward and asked, "Do you know who performed the surgery? The family's been dying to know." "We've heard it was someone from the trauma unit." The nurse smiled casually, flipping the chart. "Oh, it was Dr. Whitmore. She's the chief of surgery here. Took the case herself." The moment that name hit the air, I felt it like a wire pulled taut in my chest. There was a pause, brief, almost imperceptible. Then everything changed. My mother's head turned first slowly, as if trying to confirm that the sound she heard wasn't her own imagination. Julian blinked like he hadn't processed the full weight of the words. Marlene looked confused. And Camille? Camille shifted in her bed. Her eyes opened wider than they had since the procedure. She turned toward the nurse, toward the doorway, toward where I had just stepped into view, Lauren. Her voice was dry, faint, but sharp with disbelief. I stepped forward, just once. Her gaze locked onto mine, and then panic. She tried to sit up. Alarms started beeping. The monitor's rhythm spiked. The nurse rushed to calm her down, hands outstretched, voice suddenly urgent. "Camille, please, you need to lie still, your blood pressure." But she kept looking at me, not with gratitude, not with recognition, with fear, like I had betrayed her by saving her life. My mother turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. "You operated on her," I nodded once. "Yes." "You didn't tell us," she said. "You didn't ask," I answered. Julian crossed his arms. "Is that even legal?" I stared at him. If it hadn't been, she'd be dead. That shut him up. The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't still. It was thick with everything that had been unsaid for years now, bubbling to the surface all at once. My mother stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should have told us. We deserved to know." I met her eyes. "Since when do you want to know anything about what I do?" That hit harder than I expected. For a second, something in her cracked, but only for a second. Camille, now calmer, whispered, "Why would you, after everything? Why would you even do it?" I looked at her. At the girl who used to chase butterflies barefoot, who once cried in my arms with a broken wrist, who hadn't called me sis in nearly a decade. "Because I could," I said. "And because you needed me." The nurse finished adjusting the monitors and stepped out, clearly rattled. The rest of the room stayed frozen in a kind of moral limbo. No one said thank you, no one said sorry. They just stood there blinking, adjusting to the truth, like it was too bright to look at directly. I didn't need praise, I didn't need applause. But for one brief second, I had wanted one thing, a single sentence. A moment of clarity, a crack in the wall. It didn't come, so I turned around. And I left them in that silence they were so good at cultivating. The hospital courtyard was quiet, as if the air itself had taken a breath and didn't know what to do with it. The concrete benches were still damp from last night's rain, and the sound of distant ambulance sirens faded behind the hedges. I sat with my coffee lukewarm and bitter, trying not to think, trying not to feel. But then I heard the soft rustle of fabric beside me. My mother sat down without a word. For a moment we didn't speak. The silence wasn't tense, it was heavy. Finally she asked, "Why did you hide it?" I stared ahead, watching a leaf circle the base of the fountain. Because if you had known it was me in that room, you would have asked for someone else. Her voice caught slightly. That's not true. I turned toward her slowly. Isn't it? She didn't answer. I've been your daughter for 36 years, I said. And for 36 years, I've watched you offer your trust to strangers before offering it to me. She looked down, fiddling with the hem of her coat. It's not that I don't trust you, it's complicated. No, it's not, I said more calmly than I felt. It's actually very simple. You trust what makes you comfortable, and I never made you comfortable. Her hands stilled. You're Camille's mother, I continued. You were built to soothe, to praise, to display. She fit the part. I never did. I was difficult, too intense, too ambitious. You thought I made people uneasy. I never said that. No, I said, but you let people think it. And you never corrected them. She pressed her lips together. The wind lifted her scarf slightly, but she didn't move to fix it. I softened just a little. I didn't operate because I wanted to prove anything I said. I did it because I knew I could save her. And I wasn't about to let someone else try and fail while I stood outside the glass. She nodded slowly. I believe that. But you don't like it. She hesitated. It scared me. Good, I said. Maybe now you understand what it's like to feel powerless while someone you love is hurt and no one listens to you. That landed. She leaned back on the bench, exhaling deeply. You were always so sure of yourself, Lauren. Even as a child. I didn't know what to do with that. You didn't have to do anything with it, I said. You just had to let it be. She looked over at me, really looked. I wasn't trying to erase you. I just didn't know how to hold both of you at once. And that I believed. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. But I believed her. Still, belief doesn't erase years. I didn't expect an apology, I said. And I still don't. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I'm not here to be thanked, I continued. I just want you to stop pretending I'm invisible. I want you to see what's right in front of you. She blinked slowly. Then in a voice softer than I'd ever heard her use with me, she said, I'm trying. That was it. Not a confession, not a breakdown. Just that. I stood up, brushing the crumbs from my coat. Then keep trying. And I walked away again, not out of defiance, but necessity. Because there are some truths you don't stay to explain. Some peace you don't beg for. You simply name it. And leave it behind, knowing that for once, you were the one heard. The subject line read, Celebration for a Successful Operation. You're invited. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity has a way of pulling at even the most stitched-up parts of you. The message began cheerfully. We're thrilled to invite all members involved in last week's life-saving procedure to a small thank you gathering hosted by the administration. Your contribution was invaluable. There it was. Your contribution. Further down it listed names: Elise, Dr. Chung, Dr. Patel, 2 scrub nurses, an anesthesiologist, and me, Dr. Whitmore, part of the operating team. Not chief of surgery, not lead surgeon, and definitely not Lauren's sister of Camille Whitmore. It was strange seeing my identity filed into a bullet point compressed into a role I'd mastered, but never been recognized for in my own family. The message was formal, professional. It extended appreciation with measured distance, gratitude without intimacy. But I wasn't surprised. They had built a world where I didn't exist outside function, where Lauren the person was invisible, and Lauren the surgeon was only acknowledged when she stayed quiet, efficient, contained. I RSVP'd, yes. Not for the cake or the toasts or the shallow congratulations. I said yes to witness the moment. The moment when people would clap and shake hands and talk about miracles, and still pretend not to see the woman who held a life, her sister's life, steady between her palms. I wore my badge. I wore my name. I wore my calm. The room buzzed with voices that lifted like champagne bubbles. Lights celebratory. I stood near the back, watching the way eyes skimmed over me. A few smiled, nodding politely. 1 or 2 offered good job, Dr. Whitmore, like I'd filed paperwork well. No one mentioned Camille. No one mentioned family. And certainly no one mentioned what it felt like to cut open the skull of your own blood and choose with trembling precision to save her without being allowed to love her out loud. There was a photo board. It showed the team in the OR, faces covered, eyes alert. One photo showed me mid-procedure, my brows knit in concentration, my gloved hands steady. The caption read, Teamwork makes the miracle. Not Dr. Lauren Whitmore, who led the operation. Not even chief surgeon. Just teamwork. I looked around the room at the clinking glasses, the congratulatory speeches, the satisfied hum of people proud of themselves. And I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I finally understood something. I had saved Camille not for recognition, not even for reconciliation. I had done it because I could. Because when everything else was stripped away, titles, photos, emails, history, what was left was the skill I had built with my own hands. A skill that didn't ask for applause, only for purpose. So I stood there invisible as always, and powerful beyond their understanding. They had set up a podium at the front of the hospital auditorium. A banner hung overhead, celebrating hope, honoring heroes. Rows of chairs were filled with people in their nicest coats, murmuring with anticipation. Camille sat in the front row, her head still wrapped in gauze color, returning slowly to her cheeks. Julian sat beside her, holding her hand. My parents were seated next to them, elegant, composed, perfectly postured. As always, I stood near the back, not hiding, just observing. The administrator introduced my mother, calling her a pillar of the Cedarview community. She stepped up gracefully and adjusted the microphone. My family, she began, is deeply grateful for the tireless work of the medical staff here. The doctors, the nurses, the support team. All of you played a part in saving my daughter's life. She smiled. Broad, beautiful, perfect. We may never know the names of everyone involved. But know this, you have our endless thanks. She glanced briefly in my direction. Not at me, through me, not a single name, not mine. I didn't expect anything else, but something in my chest still tightened like a wire drawn too taut. She stepped down to polite applause. Then from the third row, someone stood up. My uncle Robert Whitmore, my father's younger brother, a man who'd once taught me how to skip stones when I was 10. I'm sorry, he said, clearing his throat, but I need to say something. He walked forward past the stage and turned to face the crowd. There's someone here today, he said, who didn't just do her job. She didn't just scrub in and follow orders. She led that operation. She took the risk. She stayed calm when everyone else held their breath. He looked straight at me. I want to thank my niece Lauren Whitmore for saving Camille's life. The room fell quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that invites words. It was the kind that weighs heavily, thick with discomfort, pride, confusion, denial. The kind that vibrates with all the things left unsaid for years. No one clapped, not even Camille. But Robert nodded to me, and I stood. Not because I was asked, not because anyone encouraged me, but because I was done sitting in the shadow of my own story. I stood with my shoulders square, my chin held high. I didn't smile, I didn't wave, I simply stood. The room didn't erupt in applause. No music swelled, no cameras flashed. But something shifted, in me, and maybe in them too. I didn't plan to say anything, but silence has a way of growing too loud. So I stepped forward, not to the podium, just far enough to be seen, heard. I'm not here to ask for acknowledgement, I said. My voice was steady, calm. I'm here to remind us all that not being loved doesn't mean you're unworthy. Eyes turned to me, some curious, others cautious. Camille looked down. For most of my life, I continued. I measured my worth through their eyes, through invitations I never received, seats I never filled, and words never spoken. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter, old, creased at the corners. My grandfather, our grandfather, left me this. I found it in his desk after he passed. I unfolded the letter and read aloud. Lauren, if you're reading this, it means life asked you to walk alone again. Don't let the silence around you convince you it's your fault. Don't let kindness be mistaken for weakness. Let it be your compass, always. I looked up. I didn't save Camille to win back a seat at the table. I did it because I could. Because she deserved another chance at life, just as I do. A pause. I'm not invisible. I'm not bitter. And I'm no longer afraid of being misunderstood. With that, I nodded, folded the letter, and stepped back. No one stopped me. No one said a word. But in the silence that followed, I felt it. Weight leaving, and something better taking its place. Camille asked me to meet her at the coffee shop on Oak and 3rd. The one with old jazz records on the walls and the smell of roasted beans so strong it clung to your coat. She was already sitting when I arrived, wrapped in a gray sweater, her hands around a mug of tea. She looked tired but not broken, pale but healing. I sat across from her. Neither of us spoke for the first few seconds. The clink of a spoon stirring nearby filled the silence. Then she looked up. "I used to say you never did anything for me." I didn't interrupt. She exhaled. I was wrong. I watched her face carefully. Camille wasn't someone who admitted things easily. We were raised to uphold perfection, not vulnerability. That day, in the operating room, she said, "I remember nothing. But everyone keeps telling me what you did. What you risked." I sipped my coffee slowly. "It wasn't a choice. You needed a surgeon. I happened to be in the building." Camille shook her head. "It was more than that. You chose to be in the building. You chose to stay." I looked away out the window, watching a child pull his mother's hand across the street. "I didn't always know how to be your sister," I said finally. "I used to think kindness was weakness. That if I wanted to survive in this family, I had to fight for every inch of space." Camille nodded. "And I used to think I had to take that space from you." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. We were trained to compete, not connect. She looked down into her tea, then said softly, "I don't remember the surgery, but I do remember waking up and seeing you at the foot of my bed. Just sitting there, not saying anything." That's when I knew, she said, voice trembling, "Whatever else we are. You didn't let me go." And then slowly she stood, walked around the small table, and hugged me, not like a sister forced by family expectation, but like a woman reaching for her own form of healing. I closed my eyes, breathed in the scent of jasmine shampoo, and let my arms wrap around her. For the first time, we weren't daughters in comparison. We were two women who had both survived being invisible in the same house. It was late when the phone rang, not emergency late, just emotionally inconvenient. I saw Mom on the screen and hesitated, then answered. Her voice was quiet. "You're probably getting ready for bed." I sat down on the edge of my couch. I was. A pause. "I wanted to say thank you," she began. "Not for what you did at the hospital, for something older." She took a breath. "You remind me of your father, too sharp, too quiet. And for years I didn't know how to love the parts of you that scared me." My throat tightened, but I said nothing. She continued. "You were always so composed, so capable. And that made me feel replaceable. Like there was no space left for me to be weak. So I treated your strength like it was a threat. I see that now," she whispered. "And I'm sorry. I didn't rush to fill the silence." Then I said gently, "If that's all you can give, I accept it. Not because it fixes everything, not because it makes me whole, but because I've decided that it won't wound me anymore." Another pause. "I love you," she said. I believed her, even if it took her a lifetime to learn how. The letter was short, just 2 paragraphs. I left it on my desk after hours, no goodbyes, no announcements. Resigning from the chief of surgery position felt less like surrender and more like shedding a second skin, one that never fit quite right anyway. I didn't go far, just downtown to the community medical college, where white coats were still a dream rather than a defense. The halls smelled like old books and fresh ambition. On my first day, I walked into the lecture hall with my notes, expecting the usual nerves. But they never came. Instead, I found something tucked inside my satchel. A pair of surgical gloves, standard blue, folded neatly in a white envelope. No card, but I recognized the handwriting on the front. For the sister I finally see. Camille. I held them in my hands longer than necessary, feeling the weight of what they meant. Not a medal, not forgiveness, but recognition, quiet and generous. It didn't erase everything, but it rewrote enough. I slipped the gloves back into the envelope and placed them in the top drawer of my desk, right above the lecture notes on trauma resilience. I used to keep no photographs, no framed smiles on desks, no sunlit family portraits hanging on sterile walls, but there's one now. Camille in her hospital bed, still pale but alive, her hand in mine, my head bowed, not speaking, just being. The photo was taken by a nurse who didn't know what she was capturing. No press, no applause. Just a moment. A quiet, trembling moment when love didn't need names to stand still. I had it printed and framed. Not for the mantle, not for show. It sits on the shelf beside my window, facing inward, not out. Not where others can see it, but where I can. Because sometimes we need proof not of who we were to others, but of what we endured when no one was watching. I used to be the shadow behind someone else's spotlight. Now I've become something else, not loud, not blinding, but a quiet light, enough for others to find their way by. Before I say goodbye, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from tonight? Is it a quiet morning coffee in hand, or a late hour when stories like this keep you company? Wherever you are, thank you for sitting with this story, for letting it unfold with all its silence, its weight, and its small, stubborn hopes. If something in it moved you, not just the surgeries or the words left unsaid, but the quiet resilience of being unseen and still showing up, then maybe you understand more than you think. And if you do, you belong here. You're not just watching a story. You're part of a space that still believes healing is possible, that second chances don't always arrive loudly, but they come. So please consider subscribing, not just to hear more stories like mine, but to stand with others who carry unseen strength too. Take care of your heart tonight. And if you feel alone, remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock. It waits, quietly, until you're ready.